다들 남아낸 게 상원하나 치료되리쇼 잡지도 때네 아주 다른 샵에 엔다지 기부 총당 준비하기 남대 다 도두치네 때문에 말아 다 기부 신비 남대 네 개버치네 네
Good afternoon, everyone. Continuing from this morning we looked at a brief presentation in this text of the lesser and intermediate paths, and now we come to the presentation of the greater path, or the path of the greater individual, which occupies the greater portion of the text.
다들이야 지단기 기부충의 남디 알라가 기부충의 예수순기 동해는 지네 다 디법봉의 권에 기부충의 남디 때문에 말해 이 기부충의 남 다지단기 냠내 망부지업이냐 다 대점기 기부충의 남 다 처벌치야 때문에 다 되는 기분 증기 남데 시중기 다 스버스음사라다 컴스음사라다 다 너는 코와디 동해외는 신인바 동해외는 신인바 지 때네 안다 타바되느냐 근데 기분 증기 남 때문에 말해서 다 기분 침표 남데 동인이 손도주배 관해 되니 시바다 시외 탄인을 최외게 탐지 개별 공판 도와야지 땡겨요 말해서
In this text, the path of the lesser individual or the lesser path is presented as fundamentally the abandonment of all wrongdoing, motivated by fear of the suffering of lower rebirth. In detail, there are a lot of aspects or practices to this path, but here that is what is presented about it. Correspondingly, the intermediate path is presented as the path of someone who seeks liberation from all of samsara, because they recognize that all of the three realms or three levels of existence, in short, all of samsara, are states of suffering. In contrast to that, the greater path is seeking the achievement of omniscience, a state of Buddhahood that is beyond both samsara and nirvana, through a path that is the integration of emptiness and compassion.
다 되는 기부심비 남대 같으냐 대선심이요 아무데라 삼바전주 저 심게와다 요와 전주기 심이 곰바사죠 대전이 요아레스 되네 삼바 다 담보 대전 담보 삼바전주 저 심게와 될래야 야체비미나 니용디야레 당보데 군주 전주기 있음 고마당 니버데 전남 전주기 있음 고마 나 정말 니용디야레
The presentation of the greater path here is divided into two phases, the first of which is the presentation of the vast intention of bodhicitta. And bodhicitta itself is presented in two sections, the cultivation of relative bodhicitta and the cultivation of absolute bodhicitta.
드네는 나 당부 군주 전주기 셈 고마디 땡겨야래 군주 전주기 셈 고마 템바텔이야 대제 가서 다지 슐록이 니야래 대양 쇼랑 유접시 쇼로게 주바 통에 뒤는 달았잖아 많은 돈을 안지 지시차 대지 타에 심지어 대제실 전주 심게 야세라네 주지바디 동해 말류 다된 되래 저배상게 세배 셈르총 대실 다대 생기 동해 다양다 저 야세라네.
The presentation with which we begin this afternoon is the presentation of the cultivation of relative bodhicitta, which occupies 2 stanzas. These are both found on page 24. These are stanza 10 and stanza 11. Stanza 10 says, from beginningless time my mothers have loved me. If they suffer, how can I worry about my own happiness? Therefore, in order to liberate sentient beings who are boundless, who are infinite, to give rise to bodhicitta is the practice of a bodhisattva. And then stanza 11 reads, all suffering, without exception, arises from the desire for one's own happiness. Perfect Buddhahood comes from the wish to benefit others. Therefore, it is the practice of a bodhisattva to completely exchange one's own happiness for others' suffering.
제가 슐로가 당부되기 단냠샤 급수세는 장도 야나 알아주지 파 튠데네 지 튠게 능글이야 아주지 냠내 체백급이야 무슨 냠내 체백급이야 안 다시 저 공부야 알았어 다 간다지 토마메베 뒤네 지 가서다 지심제 담제 장가 마음 유바메서 소머베 다지 다 딘데게 거네 넘버 2매 거네 준세 넘버 2매 거네 심제 담제 라 이동의 참바당 은 다는 자와 니지 전부 딘데지 깨버 체제 딘데게 다 간다 가서지 심제 생기 디도당 장게 디도 배 냠버다 줘야지 당 냠버다와 정도 마세베 대야지 평균 배지 심진 생기 된도 랑기 대화 르동패바 동해 당도 랜패바 아든데기 군주 천주기 심정알라 라고레 공고레소.
What's described, starting with the 10th stanza, is how we cultivate relative bodhicitta in actual meditation practice. The stages which culminate with the ability to exchange oneself for others. This begins with using reasoning and reminding oneself of the many reasons for finding beings, all of whom have been one's loving mother and so forth, for finding beings pleasing. And one cultivates this attitude of finding beings worthy of affection until it culminates in great impartial love. Then on that basis one cultivates the desire to free them from suffering, which is compassion. And this culminates in the readiness or ability to actually exchange one's own happiness or well-being for the suffering of others.
다드네 슐로가 니바디게 제탑기 내거서 선한장도 튠삼기 내거서 니 깽에 남도 키와디 템베 말에 지 가르다 딕두라 사베게 제 가르 소소라지 가르다지 딕바당 마다 기즈민도 다 간다 튠삼 인내갑래야 베타 간다지 튠삼 인내갑사나다 다 간다 베지 소소베 베네 슈라인 룸다 somewhere 곰자서디 캄보디나네 베 카테베 젤이야 아니야 소소 냠네 데바 카테베서 좀 마셔보시죠 안다지 소소기 미징어 나눠래야 안다지 갱에 남도 케베 토네 신기다지 디두 나 랑기 디두니 냠버다야 지다 고급 총 소소이나다 지금 저지를 예비미나 에너지 디도 바 지금 아주 젤렌차 제트야 근데 베즈차 네 말해서
The 11th stanza, the second stanza concerning the cultivation of relative bodhicitta, describes, from one point of view, how to implement that relative bodhicitta once one has gained the willingness, readiness, or ability to actually exchange one's own happiness for others' suffering. Also, you can look at this stanza as presenting the application of one's practice in post-meditation, especially how to do so in order to respond appropriately to adversity and transform adversity into the means of the path. The idea here is that in post-meditation, when one concludes a session of formal practice, when one leaves the shrine room, that one not leave one's practice behind, but bring it with one, so that because you now see the suffering of others as at least as important as your own suffering, you are willing to sacrifice your own happiness in order to alleviate the suffering of others.
That is 가서 되게 림버로 디스지 드미도 디스지 드미도 딱 하나디 쇼로가 니버디 꾸줍 전주심 냠샤 꾸줍 전주심 공바 대야로 접하지 마자 되네 쇼로가 다 당연히 니버디 다 디젤이야 되네 제토도 가서다 갱에 남도 치와 대야들이야 다 된세 미다르지 가시 중리도 제토도 갱에 남도 치와서 돼 마 개바치 수고도 봐 되네 인두산에 다대야 쇼장 니장에 나라라 쇼로가 주니바 수단도 제왕 다음 털제초가 초든 주네 류다롱지 뒤숨겨는 대랑과 야세라네 주숨바 다른 예배 중심이신 강다다가 뭐 죄세나 인지왕의 대디관은 다른 예배 야세라네 주시바 강시 다른 미년나서 동숨캬버 로버체네 참베심 라양 등이니 윤디죄바 야세 디니기 윤디죄바 야세라네 정아바 로만 디비우슨 가시 창의주의 승인만아야 대라게 외식인 주시기 그분도 야세라네 다디 민두비 최시 람도 켜사입니다. 민두비 최시 사데 다 초로가 당부디기 수단도 생활 사지도와 민두비 최시 사데 많이해봐 당부디기 많이해봐 람도 켜 니바 초로가 니바디기 동해와 람도 켜 되네 숨바디기 미니바 람도 켜 되네 시바디기 매바 람도 켜왔어 민두바 시 람도 켜왔디 땜베이버라
Essentially, the stanzas 11 and 12 describe different stages of the cultivation of bodhicitta, primarily through even placement. And what follow the stanzas 10 and 11, what follow the stanzas 12, 13, 14, and 15, all found on page 25, describe in post-meditation how, as part of one's cultivation of bodhicitta, one learns to transform 4 types of adversity, called the 4 undesirable circumstances, into help on the path. And these are the first, in stanza 12, when it says, even if someone out of intense desire steals all my wealth or makes another do so, to dedicate body, possessions, and all virtue of the 3 times to them is the practice of a bodhisattva. This describes how to bring the situation of loss, such as material loss, on the path. And then stanza 13, should someone sever my head, even though I did not do the slightest wrong, through the power of compassion to take on their misdeeds to oneself is the practice of a bodhisattva. This describes the situation of suffering physical pain through the aggression of another. And then the stanza 14, even if some should proclaim unpleasant things about me throughout the billion worlds of the universe, with a mind of loving kindness, to speak only of their qualities in return is the practice of a bodhisattva. Describes the appropriate response to the third undesirable, which is calumny or libel or slander. And then stanza 15, even if several people in the midst of a crowd should reveal my hidden faults and speak harsh words to me, holding them to be my spiritual friends, to bow to them with respect is the practice of a bodhisattva. Describes how to take criticism or verbal abuse on the path.
다 민주배 출시부디 다 남규지 아주지 남규 다 지조나 사나다도 간다지 베 지된 나로래야 다지 되바다 매바다 다는 신기 다지 지규 벤조라 소바 녀바다 마녀바다 다는 신기 지 거두 지 거징어 돌라 소바 다 되게 되려야 아주 가르쳐야지 배지 쉽지게 아주 the desire somewhere 되게 되려야 아주 샴바침으로 처리하려 다들이 인도스탄에 검들이야 되게 되려야 샴바메베 거네 somewhere다 되게 되지 람도 캐야 다들 소용이 그래 인도스탄 다디 마 베세나 소야데 마 치기 람네 과려야데 내라버 쉐디나 튼도 냠설래야라 갈라함시다 요데비치 루차리요래 튼담 가주레다 네급기 즉 대화도 동에 서머웨 디게들이야 치민년배에다 뽑아당 나는 닝도 된듯이 매비입니다 안 저주스면서디 이 가르쳐야지 차라다 갈라함시다 요데비미래 드링이 주산다 저주스면서디 시라게다가 닝도 쳔버르지다 다는 신기 셈레야 다지 이시쳔버시다 요den게 비트지 고가 이내다도 유메 게임을 되는 연구 말에 또 전주선바 일라든데 고아래 제상 저랑 전주선배 가서다지 티버쯤 냠내 챙게래 인지비지 고아래에서 저 왔던 것쯤씩 공모로 다티 트레이닝 전 걸리가래 소소 럽정식 정다르식 해야지 잘해요 그래서
Usually in the world we are extremely attached to praise and averse to disrespect, attached to profit and averse to loss, attached to pleasure and averse to pain. And we want all the things that we are so attached to very, very much. What's being taught here is to be without particular craving for these things. Now, the words are easy to understand, but it's somewhat hard to put them into practice. The point is that in order to pursue the Bodhisattva path effectively, we must be able to no longer make a big deal out of temporary or present experiences of pleasure and pain. In that sense, the Bodhisattva training is difficult. It requires a great deal of courage and a great deal of confidence. On the other hand, this courage and this confidence don't arise out of nothing. They come through gradual training. It's not the case that just because we adopt the Mahayana Dharma as our religion that we should expect ourselves on the spot to become courageous bodhisattvas. we have to put ourselves through the process of training and study.
다디 제랴 쇠가니 남도 켜야 말해 쇠버가니 남도 켜야 될래야 되네 소란 예 니주저르베 나라래 저러가 죽주바 다가 부신 제버 장비미 다라 자신 다오르 채나 내기 답에 불러마신도 하버자 야살라니 주딘바 랑다 냠바 멤베 교이 아게왕게 녀섭 채나야 라마신도 귀베더니 이쪽으로 냠바 야살라니 다디게 슈로가 당부디기 텔레 롱제서므로 텔레 로버제와 디게디 챙게디 람도키아지다 니바디 랑레 멤베사 서머바다지 랑다 조르바 멤바이나다 윤데 멤바이나다 다디데기베 칸사기 랑레야 녀주샤 진짜 총선 다디기들이 가지고 람제르자 데임브레.
The next two stanzas, stanza 16 and stanza 17, both found on page 26, describe how to bring what are called the two intolerables onto the path. And the two intolerables are two things that we normally in the world find unbearable or intolerable. The first of these, stanza 16, describes a situation of betrayal. It says, even if someone I cared for like my child should act as though I were their enemy, like a mother towards her child stricken with illness, to love them even more is the practice of a bodhisattva. And stanza 17 describes another thing that we normally find intolerable, which is disparagement or disrespect by an equal or supposed inferior. It says, even if someone, my supposed equal or inferior, should belittle me, influenced by pride, I would regard them like my guru with respect and place them on the crown of my head. This is the practice of a bodhisattva.
아니 이제야 슈로가 접게 봐디 소외 분시 다도 미니 찹세네라 된기 답잖아 조근 디두다라联系지 슌바메바 야살라레 주고바 냠브라차신 로만 지우 남대 부에 놓은도 탑교르게 세베벤조 닝부메시네 킹바메바 야살라레 사디게 다니보디게 주르구람도케 대송구에 비임바레 슈로가 당보되게 귀발람도키 가자 귀발람도케 하다 dane nipa degi jorba lamdu kya degi da kandan jurgui nipa di jorba chune yadra benjor dan denpa chune yadra benjor ma kuji nyam chakpa chune yadra kandan niga lo ji karwe negab kandaji chungpa ina ya kandar karwe da ji kanda chanchuk semdi minyamba ji nyamsala ya yo chi da ji
Stanza 18 on the bottom of page 26 and stanza 19 on the top of page 27 go together because together they present how to bring the situation of ruination or great loss in the case of stanza 18 and unprecedented prosperity or acquisition in the case of stanza 19 onto the path. Stanza 18 says, even if I were made destitute and constantly berated by everyone around me, struck by grave illness and menaced by evil spirits, it would still be the practice of a bodhisattva to take on the suffering and misdeeds of all others into myself without losing heart. And stanza 19, even if I became renowned and paid respect by everyone, or should I obtain wealth like that of Vaishravana, I would see the wealth of samsara as having no essence. To not have pride in it is the practice of a bodhisattva. The point of these two stanzas viewed together is that regardless of whether we experience unaccustomed prosperity or unexpected loss or impoverishment, in either case, we must not let the fluctuation in our circumstances damage our bodhicitta.
Shologa Nishdambadi, Rangi Shedan Zhou, Matuna, Chiru Zhou, Dushin Peo, Teshir Chamda Niji Mobungi, Rangu Dua Yasela Lin, Nishu Zibade, Debay and the Lense Chudanda, Chizam Jeji, Seba Peo, Kala Shinsha Gary Mobana, Telabon, Yasela Lin. Jezadi Shologa Dinubudi, Chagdan Lamda Kia, the Sungu Bimbre. 다 당부디기 당화람도 키야 니버디기 차고람도 키야 근데 인주사 다 도나지 랑초는 규지 배 랑게 초리야 저거들 소리야 즉 차와 현지 차와 깨야다 현지 다 현지 초리야 당월차 다 여기 차당기 줄래 되네 간다라 뭐라지 찬주기쌤 Nyambata Kuban Gundra beyond the audit. The danger sane, the Germainba. The Chawada Dangweki Chadangi Bay Jinyomba, the New Gun Tony. That's a Chadamba Gone under Kasuji. 다적 처유이서만 착외유다 당외유 간데지 태비미냐 다탐제냐 가르스르지 차단람도 계획관에 되네 냠슬랭고요아래서
Stanzas 20 and 21, both on page 27, also go together because they describe how to transform attachment and aversion or hatred to the path. Stanza 20, which concerns overcoming anger or hatred, says, "If I do not tame or conquer the enemy of which is my own anger, I may subdue external enemies, but they will increase all the more. Therefore, it is the practice of a bodhisattva to conquer one's own mind stream with the armed forces of loving kindness and compassion." So this is how to overcome anger. In stanza 21, "The pleasures of the senses are like salt water. No matter how much you partake, that much will your craving increase. To immediately abandon whatever objects of attachment arise is the practice of a bodhisattva." The point of these two stanzas is that obsessive attachment and anger or hatred can both equally ruin or damage our bodhicitta. So the idea here is not to let them do so, but to recognize the problem with each or both of these kleshas and to seek to bring them to the path by not obsessing about the object or stimulus which excites that particular klesha.
다들 제장 디기 구주 전주기 쌤 좋아 거디 고마 거디 때문에 다 디제랴 아노 편합 전주 쌤 고발라서 곰베 거디주 다 땡겨 비면 다디 편합 전주 쌤 곰베 거디다 선이 쉬는 바지 증면로 단도는 조디 다 전주기 쌤 오늘디 딱 간다 구주 전주기 쌤 차례하래 전남 전주기 쌤 사데 딱 간다 돈이도 배 시럽 사르 진짜지야 안주 돈이도 배 시럽 진짜지라 드시겨 하래 그런 전남 전주기 쌤 배 전주기 쌤기 잘 따버만 도배 전당 엄마 전주기 쌤 오늘디 구주 전주기 쌤디 차례하래스.
These are the sections of the text that describe the cultivation and meditation and post-meditation of relative bodhicitta, and they are followed by a section describing the cultivation of absolute bodhicitta, which I think it would be fine to leave for tomorrow. Really, the bodhicitta that we seek to cultivate is relative bodhicitta, Absolute bodhicitta is actually the result. It is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. But that can only come about through the cultivation of relative bodhicitta. So therefore, when we talk about bodhicitta per se, we generally mean relative bodhicitta.
대양 땅안 주지 가수래 이게 심지에 땀 가르치려고다 심지에 탐지 다가나 그런 지금 아주 전부링인데 다 디산 전부링 뒤름 뉴스지 봐. 다 처진 뒤름서 말이야. information error 지지 뒤주시 레디어 인도산 당 전부링디 지 전부링 봐. 총 가서 가는 상물로 핀주 타니어는 주요하래. 재산 핀주기 때 잡아서 말이야. 잡아디 알레장 지 응을세 되도 주요. 응을세 되도 주요 인도산 디균센데네 하는 아주지 간데시에 가르다 핀주 지기질이야 슈기엔 간데스 되기도 와 the effect 말다 슈기엔 간데스 되기도 와 핀주 지기질이야 din 가르다 지기된 잡았으나 다다 interconnected 말다 이제 잡아 근데 용이야 버디 땅 아주지 스텝치 통대야지 차대야래 जमनी शनु की निजु दिगदे आप समलो निमा तक बतायो देंगे तो छादे यो या तने में जुसा दिगुन zen देने आजु खारे से खारे तो तो वारसना तददि शुंदिना न सोंदे आगे 심지에 탐지 사대당 랑기 잡아디 컨디지 용디 딱고지 들은 잡아지 초대게 여지 임지 아주 하고 알았어 네 주산에 정이 지부 지 라와와도 좀 많이봐. 다 참으로 빈수지기질이야 아직 가서 잡아차돼야지. 빈수지기질을 떼야 되지. 대화도 동해서야 빈수지기질이야 떼야 되지. 정신이 버지 아주 라디오 연대 알았어.
Living in this world, in this 20th century, which we've come to call the information age or the information era, we are able to see more than ever before how interconnected each and every one of us is with each and every other one of us. The intimate and deep connection between each and every person and each and every place in the world and each and every other person and place has become more evident due to our technology and social media and so forth than it ever was. This enables us, therefore, to observe, to see clearly how much of an effect we have on one another, how interconnected we are. What this text calls all beings or all sentient beings, we can reflect upon all beings and how closely each of us is connected to all other beings. That each of us, each person, is not really independent in the sense that our happiness and suffering are very interdependent with the happiness and suffering of others.
다 딘데 니즈디 아주 참에 마도바 다 딜리하고 가셔야지 understand 좀 맞아야 의미나 and then will increase more suffering 좀 다 간다지 동해 말도 안 하지 미강알로지 selfish 다지 ran 제벌 집에서는 다도 란데 첨버 차요 누사나 안디기 안지 동해 점린디 털이야 지 동해 넘바 마도 용대야 지 마도 베기 다지 동해디 양으로 줘야지다. 지 시대로 용하지다. 아니 진짜 용하도 딱 하나 하고 차야 또 차리요. 대인 주산 내가 좋디 간다가 상으로 지금 아주 다듯이 쉽지게 간다라 가서 ran 수술에 제벌 준비 셈 고래 이네 ran 진진 셈 되게 하장 가서 초수 롱 잡았으면 나도 늘 차리게 윈주사 진짜 뭐인가 간다들이 지지 상으로 심진 상으로 지를 직대선을 다도 단도나 조디 랑기 very existence somewhere 다데 지금 심진시야야 되대봐 임바치긴바 다데 understand 채도 와데 예점을 차리 알아요.
When we fail to understand this, we increase our own suffering and that of others, and our selfishness, our self-fixation, really our selfishness increases, and it adds to and further increases our suffering and the problems that we cause others. We do need a sense of self-preservation. But the problem is when that sense of self-preservation becomes exclusive, obsessive, and becomes a limitation where we are solely concerned with ourselves and utterly ignorant of the plight and feelings of others, when we allow ourselves to become that way, we are ignoring the fact that our very existence, let alone our happiness, depends entirely upon others. So it's extremely important to understand this interconnectedness.
제사금 니나르냐 지 냠샤수 거며 제섭도 배 남도 캬 사드 순지기 관에 냠슬해야 되다 계속 싫어하려고 가르에서는 빼는 아주기 남기 동네기 냠을 쳐야 돼. 다 imagination 되지 다들 당신 지하기 삼단 다 당신 지하 되려야 남기 라마 고만 남기 라마 담반 남기 순수해라 당신 지하 될 무슨 제통계를 지다 안다지 그런데 미버 점사를 되지 어디 다 가서 당신기 배 동해배 오늘 전에배 제렌 제통계 다든데 가시 용되게 유스래. 이날 조조대 감들이야지 당신지와 삼단 미바당한데 다 imagination 되지 다 간다지 셈리야. 간다베 가수베 주주 셈리야. 안남균이 다 들지기 배 겁다를 째지 understand 지와지기 다 간다지 수수기 셈디 레디로 용하지기 들지기 저지를 체리야래. 마더베 람상지 삼 가르르다지 다시 지하사데 운수베 라렌단데 용하데 가카브르시 리네 아주 저리치요 다 저리치야는 신기 냠샤 걸리야 데네 동네 냠면체 이나 제톱 튠상 원내 걸리야 아니 데레 로버지 셰샤나 데 드고 말아 냠샤 걸리야 아 신기 동에 수래 제도비 가려야 랑가 동에 미신다데 되려잖아 저거 말아 드린 비싸디 규제한테네 제도비 내가 튠성이 내가 올라요 다 소수기 제바디 냠샤의 제수 튜바 되려지고 하되 계속 살이가
You notice that in our text the cultivation of bodhicitta is taught as the integrated practice of both even placement or meditation and subsequent attainment or post-meditation. And the integration of meditative practice and actual application in post-meditation is extremely important. Progress can only be made if we practice both of these. For example, many people practice tonglen, or taking and sending. And when we practice it, basically it's an act of the imagination. We are imagining taking on the sufferings of others and giving them our happiness. It's essentially entirely imaginary. It is said that great masters are able to actually do this, to actually take on the sufferings of others and actually give others their own happiness and virtue. But for most of us, this is entirely imaginary. It's simply an act, conscious act of the imagination that we do in order to train our minds, to make our minds understanding and empathetic, and also to make ourselves ready to put others first. So basically, the practice, the imagination, the imaginary practice that we do is really preparation for post-meditation. Therefore, if after practicing Tonglen, taking and sending as a meditation practice, when we engage in post-meditation, we turn our backs on it, do exactly the opposite, try to take others' happiness and give them our suffering in exchange, it's simply not going to work. For this training to work, our post-meditation application has to correspond to our meditation practice.
Bena tang around of the chamber, around of the chat chamber, tak Arjueji, Manguchi Sambian Alor Daji Kajuda, Koran, Alia, the Kamabe, Jitsenshim Rujavi, Lusane, Tigun Zen, the Dakoji, Kajuji, Sangi, Injil Samaro, Chanjusamba, Injil Sambaro, Chanjusamba Sombos, Da Sangi, Kushalamba Somare, Daddy Injital Lamb, in this Zanem. Okay. Don't do that. That day in Jiri Sambaro did Tangiore. That day Karshureta for Tele that Maresala Leta Karshureta the mission dog Tonzuru. Narang when I Jean the Zuru the Karasanta or me mission that Jibuji Gare, me human and she mission that Jibuji Gare Madobe. Ji Karure Be Mise Kamindo, Mise Kamindo. Mise Kam maybe Tinto, Gange Tevadus. Gange Tevadu. Di Ganlia, yes, Sambalia, Taji, Tadabado, Jig, Yeb the Missing Dinar, that Karure challenge Manguru Chumbere. Challenge Manguru Chumbere. Jiggy, Karure, Tome Sanging need to Mambo Chumbre, challenge Mambo Chumbre. That challenge Mambo Chumbine, that is Zodi, Tadabadoji, Kajure, but Mutuine, Rodiaji, Misideva, Mutin, Rodiaji. That Kandaji, Tandoibe, Kajuri, in Dondor Cheche, pretend sort of come up like that Mutine, that Rodia.
If I use myself as an example, a lot of people, because I bear the name Karmapa, regard me as a Buddha in human form. And that may be how they perceive me, but as far as how I perceive myself, I think I'm just like everyone else, nothing special. In fact, I have problems that some other people don't have. I've faced a lot of challenges, experienced lots of ups and downs already. But basically, I just keep on going, which for me means I keep on pretending to be the Karmapa.
That indigenous Mutuni, Kashra, Roda, Zodi, Chorchini, Naranji, Nindo, somewhere. That's me, Mawuji, I guess. How do you handle those situations? Somewhere with Taji, Kandid Chavins. That page, they believe I have kind of divine source, Kashotaji, 가서 파워 섬으로 야나 지 냠내 쉽지 유기대 삼바로지 잔디 유서래 땅아랑 왜는 미세다 냠내 유아버지 소화르지게 용문 따 냠내 거라 지기 매월은 냠내 영화요 말로 따이네 조디 I don't have much choice. I need to do this. Right? Then you just di junsen la dene. Ko tada bado ji ka shwe no choice in zang da dem majara jere chirwa. Da ji ka shwe out of choice. 제가 띵아 주 삼삼 팽통으로 지으세요. out of choice. 알아서 급딜이야지. 착당 계약. 빼는 넘기용 아주지. 차와다 즉 차와다 당와다 다 간다지 년바다 민년바라서 니수 망고지 연주산에 급디주산에 수수기 excuse를 채채 다지 가수지 수수를 강에 가수지 excuse지 녀모버 계약 excuse 망고를 채대요 아주 김제 망고지 이내야 오늘 전에 냠내 체급급이야 근데 왜 excuse를 좀 매버치지 그럼 가수다 디 녀모 버티야 길이야 지카르페 그런 고급 세난다도 야나 초이스를 좀 매버셔야지 에너지 수수기 다가르에 자주 셈소마로 다디기 디나 송대야 저기 람케르 디기 지부마도지 녀모 버티야 더 초이스를 매버셔야 이제 디 excuse를 배 요체 근데 총나 지젠다 야부 처음에서 들 정도스. 시야만 땅 아주 그 뒤에지. 그 뒤에지 다 소소지 카메라 그러지. 그 뒤에지 excuse를 세제 미치요나. 다들 세연주사네. 안다 그런 균센 땀낭 섬으로. 균센 안다 마이네 균센 땀낭 그러지 그 뒤에지 러러. 근데 대자요 되게 정권을 붙여 소소소 거를 쓰요. 근데 현대 가지위네 야게 잠라면 되지. 이러지 양대 유서.
What keeps me going? I suppose I could say it's a kind of courage. People ask me, they say, how do you handle these situations? Some people believe that I handle them because I have divine powers, or that at least I must have some extraordinary inner practice. I don't feel that I have extraordinary inner practice. Extraordinary practice comes from doing a lot of practice. The answer, how do I handle all of this, is very simple. I have no choice. I'm out of options. I'm out of choices. I have no choice whatsoever but to go on, to continue. And I've experienced that in some ways, choicelessness, having no other option, no choice to make, can be helpful. Because amidst of all of our experiences are giving rise to attachment and aversion and dealing with what we like and don't like and what we want to hear and don't want to hear and so on, we often look for an excuse in situations. We use the situations as an excuse to respond to them with our kleshas. In practice, there is in fact no excuse for kleshas, because practice finally, especially the cultivation of bodhicitta described here in our text, is choiceless. You cultivate it because there is no other option. There is no other choice. There's nothing else you can do. So I guess some of this training comes down to stop looking for excuses, because we're very clever at rationalizing why we do things that we know we shouldn't do when there is in fact no rational reason to do them to start with. And when we do that, of course, we deceive ourselves. Lari.
드네 인주서 추주시대 체계를 참사하는데 드네를 지시한 다시 단기 And the ready be Karshre Mikashi yang expected Chaban and Shinji Tak and the Dishid Gabriel Gade the Kechumason. Chojin and others worried of you. Some dead of this year, Karasana the Lane Suduma in Dusana that was CJ Manguare, Sholoka Manguare. The young energy Sarocha. That Lamazzini da Mademba Degora, that one Duad and Dun Sarocha and some other Kanga Madoji, Yamne Cheto William Sana, this empty the eye or Marvata. Chezan and Magic Dun Sarocha and some Digi Semde Chezan, and the shade gave a gala. La Tits Gab to catch Humasons. And something the environment that Javaja die on the years. And Kashi Samsam Kashria Loma Kashi Zombie Katulia or Renshi Susuji Sheko Masamne or Renshingi Kashudaji Maji Hobana Maji Taji Zobachim Cheki Chimposian, Tak Gombo Long doing the Chene. Tak under Diduji on the US. Tainea. Loma Kasher and Zomi understand and Loma Telegusare, and around Gusare. Arasia was some business heavy near, she and commenting it. Now to me, Charles. The difference on the door. 3 to Santigus and Dene. The Shema was kept to Masons.
Now, I'm aware that some people may be expecting a more detailed or extensive commentary on these stanzas of the 37 practices. From my own point of view, I was more concerned that we would be able to get through them in the time we have before us. Of course, it would be very easy to simply read through them and not comment on them, but that would not give you material that you could actually work with and use. Teaching for me is a function very much of
Actually, that is okay, no problem. Mine means something else.
Well, what did you mean?
What do you mean?
Well, we want to know what you mean.
Let's finish.
Okay. But the thing about the environment, should I say that?
I will do so.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Don't look mean. Just continue.
Okay. For me, teaching in general is a function very much of the environment, which includes the people, the students who are present. Sometimes, with some groups, I don't even have to think about it. To use a highfalutin term, it emerges spontaneously from the space of my mind. And then in other situations, I find that no matter how hard I think, I can't think of a single thing to say about a topic. My mind becomes utterly dark.
Yeah, something like that, almost like that. And actually, I can't hear properly because this, the sound system is not designed for me; it's for the public. And yes, I think because I've been in America, maybe outside of India already, like 1 year, in America maybe 8 or 9 months. Long time I didn't have like any teaching on these sort of things. One reason is actually I'm always thinking I'm not qualified to teach anything. This is maybe the biggest reason I have. And also that today, I'm trying to give this explanation of what is this 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. I want to should explain very more detail, but I have one worry, that is because it's quite long and I can't finish in time. I have that worry. Actually, that means I'm not qualified teacher. The qualified teacher is not worrying how he's finishing or not. He's worrying the practice, not the sort of he will teach, finish his teaching or not. Like he worried about that, then that means he's not good. That's why. Yeah, makes sense? Makes sense, yeah. Makes sense. Okay.
So now we'll conclude with the dedication and aspirations.